in a space that is dedicated to how the CCC must engage those that are willing to work with it. But nevertheless, I think I will indulge because I'm sure there are so many other people who may also want to hear an opinion on this issue concerning Dr. Kupe. How to handle the issue. You are right when I said, a political party doesn't have the power to choose its supporters, but it can choose its leaders. The point I was trying to make is that, we have had people in the past. I mean, for example, there are many people who have serious questions about the late former President Robert Mugabe. But in 2018, he came out and endorsed Chamisa as his preferred candidate. Now, what do? Do you come out and say, no, Mr. Mugabe, I don't want you to be my supporter? That's probably counterintuitive, probably counterproductive, because you are in an electoral contest, and there are people who probably sympathized with Mr. Mugabe. There are people who probably were unhappy with the way that he was treated by the regime. And those people seeing Mr. Mugabe saying, I'm supporting Nelson Chamisa, and at the time the MDC Alliance, it probably swayed them to vote for the MDC Alliance. You don't reject votes. You don't say, please don't vote for me. That's the point I was making. So, concerning Dr. Kupe, again, someone who has caused so much anxiety, so much trouble, so much hurt over the past 2 years, with the decimation of the party. It was decimated until the MDC Alliance no longer existed. There had to be a new political party. And she then comes in and says, well, now I'm supporting you. Again, what do? Do you say, please go away? I don't want you to support me. I don't want you to tell your supporters, whatever supporters she has, to support me. Again, it seems to me from a political point of view, realpolitik, it is obviously counterintuitive and counterproductive to do so. What you need to be cautious about is, of course, as you pointed out, the designs. What is the purpose? At the end of the day, the party has to have rules. The party has to have protocols on how it engages everybody, including those who are coming in. There have to be processes of how someone becomes a leader. For all their weaknesses, you may even have to look at ZANU-PF itself. It has a process. There are people like Didmas Mutasa who are very senior members of ZANU-PF, who I believe have now gone back to ZANU-PF, but you don't see them clamoring to be leaders of ZANU-PF. ZANU inotidzokera kuseo unotangira card carrying member. There is discipline in that respect, and in my opinion, the CCC itself has to have clear rules on how it deals with people who are joining it, and especially people who may have been part of the broader movement in the past and have committed certain issues that were disagreeable. How they come in. But no, you don't reject supporters. You don't reject votes. I think you would be a foolhardy as a politician to reject people who want to vote for you, or people who want to campaign for you. But of course, you have to be astute enough to understand that leadership is a completely different ball game, and if you understand the long game, you must also have your own game. You must also understand how you are going to deal with it. And I like to think that the leadership of the CCC has enough wisdom and is astute enough to understand how it would handle such situations. In the same way as handling coalitions, we saw how the creation of the MDC Alliance as a coalition unraveled over the past term of parliament, or the current term of parliament. And, if it were up to me, I would make sure that if ever there were going to be a coalition with other political parties, they would be structured in such a way that you avoid the pitfalls that the MDC Alliance went through over the last 4 years. So that for me is is important. I don't think you should dismiss the emotional concerns of people, but I also think that you have to be astute enough as a politician, as a political party, to understand that if people come and they want to support you, it's up to them. Their decision is in the ballot box. You are not going to command them to vote for you or not. That's up to them. What happens when you choose your leadership is a completely different game altogether. There was an issue concerning the African Court of Human Rights. I think that Rose will probably be better placed to answer that, because I know that the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights and other NGOs have actually participated in the African Commission, which is an older body, and there have been judgments which have been given, opinions by the African Commission, which are not binding, but opinions which are supposed to be persuasive in how we implement our laws. But someone asked about public pressure and litigation, and let me just pause for a moment and say, one of the driving factors for the big Saturday read, and the big Saturday read began sometime around 2015, but that was only sort of the new incarnation of the work that I've always been doing for the past 20 years. I've always been ideating, I've always been writing, and one of the reasons why I decided to start writing was because I saw precisely how the law was being used as part of the authoritarian system. And it was either through legislation or through judgments of the courts of law. And I thought that my purpose, as academics, we would write, and we do write for academic journals. And those things are read by our peers, they are read by students, and they write their assessments, and it ends there. This information never really gets to the people who need it. My motivation has always been that my work as an intellectual needs to go to the people. I need our people to understand what the Constitution says. They need it more than my fellow academics and my students. I need people to understand what is meant by political rights. When a judgment is pronounced by the Constitutional Court, I should be able to critique that judgment and put it out into the public domain so that people understand. Because we have a habit of saying, this is what the court has said, and then people say that is the law. My job, as a, if you want to call me a gatekeeper, is to say, this is what the Supreme Court has said, this is what the Constitutional Court has said. However, I believe the Constitutional Court is wrong because of A, B, C, D. That way, people get informed about the other view. These are things that I could sit down and write long academic articles, and which we do. But for me, I think that it's important for us as intellectuals to engage, and that's what we do. If you look at the Sangweni case that Rose spoke about, the moment it was published, the moment we saw that application, I decided that I was going to critique that, regardless of the subjudicial rule and so forth. I said I'm going to critique it and demonstrate why this application is weak, why it cannot stand the test. And I did so. I don't know whether it would have influenced the way in which the matter was then handled, because I understand that it was then withdrawn, or whatever happened there. But that is what we do, and I urge other, lawyers, colleagues in the academy, whatever disciplines they are doing, to say that the things that we learn, the things that we write about in our careers, they're not just for our careers. They are things that are relevant to the daily lives of our people. And so when things happen, let us engage them, let us talk about them. And that's what the Big Saturday Read is intended to do. It doesn't please everybody, but you know what? I plow on regardless and continue to shed light on legal developments, political developments, understanding the use of lawfare, understanding the use of the selective application of the law. We've been doing this. We've been sharing this information, and I'm happy to see ordinary people talking about these things, using these terms. Lawfare, selective application of the law. Challenging and questioning the constitutional court. That's what we should do, and I would wish that we have more. I'm happy to see my young brother who is here, Taona. He's been doing fantastically well. writing and also critiquing. We need to do more, and this is a challenge that I throw to others, in the academy, to other intellectuals who are here, to say that this is not just things that we reserve for our books or to enhance our careers, but these are things that affect us on a day-to-day level, and we must talk about them and engage the people so that everybody understands what's going on and people can make informed opinions. I'm going to stop there and let Rose handle the other questions, I think, which are more to do with the legalities, and especially the question about the African Court of Human Rights. Thank you.
Thank you. It was quite interesting to hear the contributions and some of the questions posed by the listeners and participants. Maybe just to start off with a question on the African Court, whether we can actually make use of the African Court. The African Court of Women and People's Rights was created following the coming into force of the optional protocol to the African Charter on Women and People's Rights, which basically is an instrument that was agreed upon by the governments on the African continent. Then there were members of the Organization of African Unity, which is now the African Union. So what happens is that if the government joins or ratifies or agrees to be bound by the optional protocol to the African Court, then the African Court places certain obligations on the government in terms of what the African Court can do when there are cases of human rights violations. The main challenge that we have with the instrument or the treaty that establishes the African Court is that even if the government signs or agrees to be bound by ratifying that treaty, there's an additional requirement that the government has to deposit a declaration allowing citizens or other parties to actually take cases to the African Court challenging the conduct of that government. I think you can imagine whether there are many African governments that have actually firstly ratified the optional protocol that establishes the court and also deposited the declaration to allow citizens or those that are concerned with human rights violations to take cases before the African Court. At the moment, there are very few countries, there are less than 10 countries on the continent that have actually allowed their citizens to be able to make use of the African courts. Some that had actually done that have now withdrawn their declarations. And one of them is actually Tanzania, where the African court sits. But we have an option, its citizens from Zimbabwe. Although we have not ratified the African court optional protocol, the government is still bound by the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which was when it was agreed upon by the African governments, established what we call the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. The difference between the African Commission and the African Court is that the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has got commissioners. They are not necessarily lawyers. Some may be lawyers, some may not be lawyers. It's not really a requirement for one to be a lawyer to be a commissioner for the African Commission. The African Commission can actually hear cases, they call them communications. And there is no requirement for a government to deposit an additional document for organizations that have whatever status with the African Commission to be able to file communications on human rights violations against some of the countries on the continent. So the African Commission has a number of cases that have been filed against the government of Zimbabwe. One of the cases that may be of interest was the 2013 communication that was filed by a group of Zimbabweans in the diaspora, who they were calling on the commission to make recommendations for the government to ensure that the diaspora was able to vote in the constitutional referendum. So they were seeking interim relief measures on an urgent basis, compelling the government to take action to ensure that they could vote. The African Commission actually then did issue a provisional order commenting that the government puts in place measures to allow the diaspora to vote. That was an interim order. So the case remained ongoing because they still had to hear the merits and then make a final decision. What was an interim order, it was not respected. I think we all know that the diaspora didn't vote. And then after the referendum, we waited for some time until late last year when the African Commission then actually did hand down its decision on the merits on whether the diaspora should have been allowed to vote. So when the order was handed down, unfortunately, the African Commission said that there was no obligation, there were no violations of provisions in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights when the government did not allow the diaspora to vote. Unfortunately, it took many years for the African Commission to finalize that case. And at the moment, due to the limitations that we have to approach the African court, several organizations on the continent have been working together. We have an African court coalition where we are trying to push as many governments as possible to ratify or to sign on to the optional protocol that establishes the African court, and then for them to also deposit the declarations to allow for litigation to be taken to the African court. It will probably take a long time due to the decreased appetite by the African governments to actually ratify the optional protocol, deposit the declaration to allow their citizens to take them to the African court, but we'll continue to push for that. And then there was inquiry around the BVR processes and the arrest of some of the people who are accused of electoral fraud due to the nature of registration, the number of people registered its addresses, and who can take such cases, who should be filing such cases. In terms of the Electoral Act, such actions are defined as electoral fraud. And in terms of our law, if there's an offense, really restrict who can report that case. Anyone can report, even a third party who's not directly involved. So there's no limitation. But what we should be pushing for and expecting is that even if there's such a report that is made, then the process of investigating, the process of ascertaining the facts, and the process of prosecuting should be done fairly and independently to ensure that justice is actually delivered in an impartial manner to safeguard the rights and interests of those that may be implicated. So we do hope that when such cases arise, even if they are raised by people who are not part of the Electoral Commission, then the investigations are independently conducted. There is no selective application of the law, which we have been talking about, to ensure that justice is not only done, but it's actually seen to be done if there are any offenses that have taken place. Thank you for the opportunity to respond to the questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Rose, and as well to you, Dr. Magaisa, for the contributions. I think you adequately answered our participants and highlighted very important issues that we currently face. So, unfortunately, due to our time, we might have to just limit the amount of people that can contribute. So, I just want to ask just one more person, just to give a contribution, a closing contribution, and then if you can just help me or just to thank also our hosts. But I think after the contribution, then we can just go through our closing remarks and just thank our host. So I think let me ask Signoro. He has his hand up. He or she. I'm sorry about that, but they have their hand up. So if you'd like to contribute, I think you can go ahead. Just a closing statement or something to just add to this discussion, and then we can close off.
Thank you very much. Thank you, listeners. I would like to thank the organizers of this
Well,
platform.
Signoro, you would have to unmute yourself and keep it as brief as possible, please. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
I think Senior is having a
Can
bit
you
of
hear me now?
challenges with the network. So I think we might have to pass and then just ask for another person to speak. Can I ask Elder Benura
Can
to
you hear
come
me now?
ahead? I think
Can you hear me now?
I've just given you permission to be a speaker, and then you can just give us a closing contribution, please. Elder Benura, please.
I think there was Dobbs who has been waiting before Elder.
Hello, can you hear me
Okay.
now?
So maybe we can just slot the two of them. So
If you do it
Dobbs,
very quickly, please. Yeah, Dobbs.
yes, just under 6
Many things. There are just one or more questions. The first one is we just see that at times we are managing to identify perpetrators of violence within the armed forces, but there's no prosecution going around, and we wonder why can't they use private prosecution, which is a bit fair and which doesn't require the state to do it. Then the other issue, at times we don't know why organizations which are yet like Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights do the public relations of the state when they went the wrong side of the law. Like today, you mentioned that those who have assaulted Mazibaba with Sanduko, they are under arrest. This is not the case, the justice says so. The police just reacted to lower our temperatures. We are aware of that. But once they mentioned, the government is deemed to be taking an action. And the third question and final is why is it like orders given like those ones for fair play on media? Why are you not suing the media once you identify to say it's misinforming and doing all sorts of shenanigans? Yeah, that's my closing remark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dobbs, for that contribution. I don't know if either of you, Dr. Magaisa or Rose, would like to take that question, and then I think that will be the last of it, and then we can close off.
Yeah. Just I think I'm not sure where Dobbs is getting the information that ZLHR is doing PR work for the regime. I mean, with respect, there are very few organizations that have stood up, against the regime so publicly, so bravely as the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights has. I know that Rose has the ability not to perhaps get into defending the organization that she leads. Whatever information that they would give out, it would be information that is based on what they know, and I trust them. These guys work under very difficult conditions, and they are the first on the scene. They are what would be called first responders to any crisis. They are always there, and very often we don't even get to hear or see the work they do. So I don't know where that one is coming from, but maybe Rose might want to speak on it, although perhaps it would be unfair to put her in that situation. concerning, why matters are, they are brought before the courts. Issues are raised in ways that sometimes are not always highlighted in the public domain. But when you are navigating that space in an authoritarian regime, it's a complex space, it's a difficult space, and people go through hoops. Sometimes lawyers themselves get arrested while they are representing their clients, matters that perhaps don't even reach the ears of the public. And maybe, look, I know that our time is running out. I could just conclude by saying, elections are critical. We live under an authoritarian regime. It's never easy, and one of the things that such regimes would actually prefer is for people to give up and not to participate in these electoral processes. They will always find their surrogates to compete with, and they'll get on for the next 5 years, and you'll still be mourning from outside. So it's important to take those spaces to do what is necessary. We always say we want reforms to be done, but it's also important to look at internal reforms. What is being done by opposition political parties? Are they fielding enough polling agents at all polling stations? We know that this hasn't happened in the past, and we have to raise our hands and say, look, we have failed. If we don't do that, you don't learn. Are we fielding the correct polling agents? Are we identifying the right polling agents for those jobs? Are we capacitating them enough in order to carry out their jobs? So those are important things that I think you have to look at internally and see what needs to be done. Learning also from other jurisdictions, other countries, what they have done in order to deal with these issues, dealing with authoritarianism. So the regime is never going to make the electoral environment perfect. The playing field is always going to be uneven. What will make the difference is what the opposition party will do to overcome those odds. And I will conclude with that and hand it over to Rose. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.
Maybe just to highlight that there was a question around whether there is no possibility of doing private prosecutions in instances where there are cases of brutality against citizens. In the other cases that are not prosecuted by the National Prosecuting Authority. In the past, there have been some attempts to institute private prosecutions. One of the challenges is that when you want to institute a private prosecution, you have to get a certificate issued by the National Prosecuting Authority saying that they will not prosecute, that they are not prosecuting, for you to be able to actually institute the private prosecution. The other challenge that has also been faced is that there are cost implications around private prosecutions. And for some people, they have not really had any confidence in the criminal justice system anymore, especially where the police refuse to investigate or where the prosecution refuses to prosecute. So those are some of the challenges. But what we see over the years has been that victims of police brutality, political violence, have taken the civil action route where they've actually gone on to claim for monetary damages for pain and suffering against those that would have actually perpetrated those acts of violence against them. And we've had many cases where the victims have actually been awarded damages in the form of monetary awards by the courts. In some cases, the monetary awards have been honored. The only challenge has been the value of the money that is awarded because of the monetary changes, the currency changes that have taken place over the last few years. where you file a claim in United States dollars, and the next time you're being told that the United States dollar is equivalent to the local currency, and also issues around delays in finalizing those cases, inflation, and the implications on the value of those claims. So most victims opt for the civil claims because they get something out of it. And in terms of prosecutions, normally when a prosecution takes place for crimes, then it's basically just about punishing. But some victims would want something in return in terms of restorative justice. So we received some reports that the police were claiming to have actually started investigations and that they had arrested some people who had assaulted Mazibaba. But of course, from our end as Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, representing Mazibaba Shanduko, our main concern is around ensuring that he has adequate representation when he appears in court, and that if he wishes to take further action, then we can support him. And if there's any progress in terms of prosecuting those offenders, or if there is no progress, and he would want to also pursue the criminal route against the officers involved, then we can see how we can support, bearing in mind that our role will be limited. Prosecution is supposed to be done by the National Prosecuting Authority after investigation by the police. There are other issues in terms of complaining within the protocols of the police service, filing a complaint to compel for investigations and for prosecution, which we can explore if there is no progress in ensuring that the perpetrators are actually prosecuted. That is, the client really wishes to pursue the criminal route, which in some cases, some clients are very keen on, but in some instances, because of the lack of confidence in those involved in the criminal justice processes, some people would opt to go for the civil claims where they actually get something in return. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Rose, for that contribution, and just a special thank you to the panel. I think we had a really fruitful discussion today, and we touched on so many issues that thoroughly affect everyday life and everyday citizens. So I just want to thank you for taking your time out to share this space with CLC and take your time to give the citizens and just, give your insight and expertise in terms of the issues that we have. In my culture, if I had spent 2 hours questioning adults, I would have been in big trouble. But I'm happy that in this space, you get to pose questions to really important people who have a really powerful insight on our issues. So if you all could help me, all the participants, if you all could help me, just a show of I don't know, whatever emoji comes to your mind, just to thank our hosts for us, Dr. Magaisa and Rose, just to show your appreciation for taking their time and being here with us and all the knowledge that they've shared. So just an emoji for acknowledgement if you feel this, if you share the same sentiments to our host. I think that would be very much appreciated. And I see them coming. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this. And lastly, as well, if you can just also give yourselves, the listeners, an emoji. Just thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking your time. And thank you for those who have contributed and those who really find a cause in what we are trying to achieve. We are trying to spread the Constitution. We are trying to spread consciousness of the Constitution. And I hope we will all have a peaceful March 26 elections. I hope nothing really critical comes out of it. And, we get to practice some of the things that we've discussed here. So really thank you to each and every one of you. And on that note, I would like to end the space. And once again, thank you to our host and thank you to you listeners. Goodbye.